So a few weeks ago, a friend asked me if I wanted to spend my Sunday morning taking some photos of a hockey game he was playing in exchange for some money or some beers. And while I told him that I'd love to dip my toes into some sport photography, something that I don't really have much experience with, that unfortunately I'd have to refuse any payment. And this is a video about why. A couple of years ago, I picked up a borrowed camera and started a brand new hobby, photography. About once a week, on average, I lace up my shoes, I walk out the door and I walk around my home city, which is Christchurch, New Zealand, and take photos of interesting people or buildings or just anything really that takes my fancy. Now, as my competence grew and as more and more of the people that I knew started to find out about this new hobby, I started to experience a situation that I think will be familiar to any other photographers or mechanics or medical practitioners out there, and that's that I started to get asked for hobby-related favours. As I became the resident guy with a camera for just about everyone I knew, I started to be asked to maybe take some photos at a sports game or a store opening or some social event or family gathering that they were attending, sometimes with a little cash offered to sweeten the deal. And also I noticed that any time that I told someone new about this hobby of mine, one of their first questions invariably was to ask how, not if, mind, but how I was making money off of it. Oh, so you take photos in your spare time for a couple of hours a week, on your Sunday afternoon. Do you do weddings, events? Do you sell prints? My frustration here isn't that people are taking an interest in my hobbies or that they are asking me to do them favours. It's rather that everyone seems to be so adamant that I should be monetizing this thing that I do for fun and terribly confused when they find out that I don't plan to. This video is for anyone who is confused by that move and also for anyone who might be thinking about monetizing a hobby of theirs. Now, the first reason that I refuse payment for my photography is that it turns a kindly favour into a business transaction, and business transactions come with expectations and standards. If I'm taking payment to shoot a mate's hockey game, there comes a certain expectation, conscious or otherwise, that the photos are actually going to be of some quality, and as someone who doesn't really have experience with sport photography, it's not really something that I'm comfortable or confident in accepting. And in addition to standards of quality, a paid photographer can be expected to respond promptly to messages or emails, to make the product available in a variety of formats and maybe even edit that product to a high standard. None of these things I really want to commit to. However, if I choose not to take payment, all of a sudden I'm just a good friend who's doing them a favour, and if the photos come out like a little blurry or they're not available online in their original raw format, well, hey, it was free. Now, the second reason that I'm a little hesitant to turn this hobby into a hustle is that I fear that it will dilute the parts of it that I actually like the most. Now, let me use a pie chart to illustrate this point. Now, this is a pie chart showing the percentage of the hobby time is spent doing the part of the hobby that I actually like, the bit where you take the photos, which is shown here in blue. Now, if I were to turn this into a side business, I'd need to add to this pie chart things like administration, sending invoices, trying to find clients, maintaining a website, doing taxes, responding to emails. Like, you get the point. And I fear that with every task that you have to add in order to make a business out of something, every task that you have to perform subtracts from the time that you actually get to spend doing the bit of it that you actually like. Now, the third reason I'm not going to take payment for my photography is that it forces me to tailor my style and make creative choices in a way that satisfies the client and not necessarily in accordance with my personal artistic style or preferences. At the moment, with my street photography, for example, I'm really focusing on trying to capture kind of small, intimate moments that often go sort of unnoticed by the people around. and especially where that frame kind of includes very harsh light contrast. It's a style that I'm really attracted to and that I'm trying to emulate. Now, if one of the aims of my photography becomes to generate money, whether that's through working with a client or trying to generate an online following, the focus of my art has to shift from what makes me happy to what makes other people happy, whether that's a client or an Instagram follower base. Now, I do post to Instagram, but I really do my best not to pay attention to the numbers at all, because I find that the images that get the most likes aren't generally the ones, at least a lot of the time, that I prefer. Whereas if I were to work with a client, or if I were to try and grow my Instagram as quickly as possible, I'd have to pander to the preferences of that client or to my Instagram follower base and create work that maybe didn't satisfy me creatively as much, but which was more amenable to popularity among the people that followed me. So in addition to all of the logistical and logical arguments I've made here, I want to actually instead, just to wrap up, make one that's rooted in experimental and evolutionary psychology. Now, in his book Drive, Daniel Pink writes a lot about the kind of things that motivate humans and the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivations. And I think one of the most important points in this book is summed up by this quote from psychology researcher Edward Deci. When money is used as an external reward for some activity, the subjects lose intrinsic interest for that activity. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if you offer someone an extrinsic reward, a carrot or stick, essentially, to someone to complete a task that they are intrinsically motivated to do. Now, intrinsic motivation is something that you do out of for its own sake or for your own satisfaction. So if you introduce a carrot or stick to that to encourage them to do that, in addition to their intrinsic motivation, people can actually lose that intrinsic motivation to complete that task, and that leaves them doing that thing, whether it be photography or whatever, not for the intrinsic motivation anymore, but just to achieve the carrot or avoid the stick. So that means if we start to associate money with the things that we're intrinsically motivated to do, we run the risk of losing our inherent passion for that thing. So getting paid for a creative act can sometimes spoil the inherent amazingness of that act, and I want to keep doing photography because I like to do it, not just because I'm getting paid to do it. Now, I want to make abundantly clear that I'm by no means saying that you should never ever get paid for something you do as a hobby, or that you should never try and make a passion your job. Just that I don't think it should be the default. You know, there are plenty of hobby photographers out there who take the occasional paid gig, and I'm sure many of them are glad they do. I just think that the decision to move from a completely pure hobby to a partly or wholly paid one is a decision that should be made consciously and deliberately. And I think, especially with the rise of things like hustle culture and the attraction of side hustles in a time like this, that distinction can sometimes fall through the cracks.